Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Eleanor burst through her parents' front door, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her mother, Penelope Strickland, immediately sensed something was gravely wrong. "Eleanor, honey, what happened?" she asked, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. Eleanor collapsed into her mother's arms, her sobs shaking her entire body. Between broken cries, she managed to choke out, "Zachary, he's gone." Penelope cradled her daughter, gently stroking her hair, trying to calm her enough to speak. Eleanor pulled back just slightly, her trembling hands thrusting an envelope toward her father, Anthony Strickland. "He sent this to me at work," she managed to say through ragged breaths. Anthony took the envelope cautiously, his expression unreadable, and before opening it, he asked in a measured tone, "Where's Benjamin? Is he with Zachary?" Sniffling, Eleanor nodded weakly. "Yes, Zachary dropped Kevin off here earlier, said he needed to run errands with Benjamin." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice faltering as she added, "And then I got this, divorce papers, at my office." Anthony sank into his armchair, his gaze shifting between his wife and daughter, who clung to each other on the couch like two survivors on a lifeboat. While Penelope whispered soothing words, Anthony unfolded the divorce papers with deliberate care. His face darkened as he read. "No warning, no discussion. He served her at work," he muttered, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He scanned the document again and then turned his attention to Eleanor. "He's accusing you of infidelity. Is there any truth to it?" Eleanor's face crumpled. "No, I've never cheated on him. He's convinced I'm having an affair with someone at work, but it's not true. I love him," she sobbed, her voice breaking into a heartbreaking cry. Anthony's lips pressed into a tight line. He didn't believe for a moment that the accusation was legitimate. "This reeks of a setup," he thought grimly. Out loud, he asked, "Did he ever say what made him suspicious? Why would he think you were unfaithful?" Eleanor's frustration bubbled over. "I don't know. Maybe it's because I hugged a coworker after we closed a big sale," she said bitterly. Then, hesitating, she added in a quieter voice, "There was one incident. After a work party, I was drunk, and a colleague kissed me. I stopped him the second I realized what was happening, and nothing else happened. I swear." Anthony's frown deepened as he turned the page. "He's asking for joint custody of Benjamin but wants no involvement with Kevin," he said, his tone laced with disbelief. "In fact, he's requesting that Kevin's last name be changed and his name removed from the birth certificate. Do you know why?" The room fell silent. Penelope and Eleanor exchanged a horrified glance before Eleanor crumpled into her mother's arms, sobbing anew. Anthony's voice broke through the noise, steady and commanding. "Eleanor, look at me." Reluctantly, Eleanor lifted her tear-streaked face to meet her father's piercing gaze. Penelope watched uneasily as Anthony's tone grew heavier. "He claims Kevin isn't his child. There is a DNA test here that shows there is less than a 1% chance that Zachary is the father. Is that true?" Eleanor let out a strangled cry, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. Penelope shot her husband a sharp glare. "You're not helping," she snapped. Anthony didn't back down. "Did you know about this?" he asked Penelope, his voice cold. "Did Eleanor tell you?" Penelope hesitated, weighing the implications of her answer. Finally, she replied, "No. This is news to me, too. Eleanor's just as blindsided as we are." Anthony didn't look convinced. "Hand over your phones," he demanded. "Both of you." Penelope bristled. "What? No! You're not going to violate our privacy like that." Anthony's gaze hardened. "If there's nothing to hide, you won't mind. Either you unlock them, or I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Penelope's voice turned venomous. "I've never given you a reason to distrust me, Anthony. You're not getting our phones, and we're not getting divorced." His tone was steel. "I've ignored too many lies over the years, but no more. Watching my daughter let another man raise her child has changed everything. Phones, now, or this ends here." Penelope snapped, her composure shattering. "To hell with you! I'll take everything you have and leave you with nothing." Anthony stood, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. His voice was low, tinged with disappointment. "Do what you feel you need to," he said before walking into the kitchen, leaving the family fractured in his wake. Just minutes later, he reappeared, a plastic Ziploc bag in hand. Flipping the bag inside out and slipping it over his hand like a makeshift glove, he meticulously gathered the cluster of used napkins scattered in front of Eleanor. Once the task was complete, he turned the bag right side out and sealed it with a sharp, deliberate motion, pinching the zipper tightly between his fingers. Penelope's voice shattered the silence, a piercing cry of outrage. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her hand trembling as she pointed accusingly at the bag. Her entire body seemed to vibrate with anger, a fury Anthony had never directly faced in almost 30 years of marriage. It struck him that he might not truly know the woman he'd shared his life with. "I'm going to contact Zachary and ask him about the DNA testing service he used," Anthony replied evenly, his tone calm but firm. "He found out Kevin wasn't his son. I need to know if Eleanor is mine, or if you've been lying to me for nearly 3 decades. Penelope let out a guttural scream and lunged at him, her nails clawing toward his face with unrestrained fury. The sensation of losing one's breath is indescribable unless you've lived it. The panicked, suffocating fight to inhale again. Instinct kicked in for Anthony. Despite it being 4 decades since his short-lived karate practice, the muscle memory remained. As Penelope's nails raked his skin, he reflexively delivered a precise strike to her solar plexus. The hit wasn't aggressive, just enough to knock the air from her lungs. She crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath, her face etched with terror. As Penelope writhed on the ground, Eleanor's scream pierced the air, panic evident as she watched her mother struggle. Unshaken, Anthony turned on his heel and walked to his office. He knew Penelope would regain her breath in moments, but he couldn't wait. He needed to leave before she gathered herself. Moving quickly, he packed his laptop, iPad, and a few changes of clothes. Before departing, he accessed the Wi-Fi router and reset the password. Penelope depended on the internet for everything from Facebook to Reddit. Without Wi-Fi, she'd be effectively cut off. With his belongings stuffed into a backpack, Anthony strode past his recovering wife without a word and left. 3 decades of marriage were over. His first stop was a nearby McDonald's, where he connected to their free Wi-Fi. There, he accessed his financial accounts. Methodically, he paid off and closed their joint American Express Gold card, followed by their Chase card. Using the bill pay function, he transferred half the funds from their joint bank account to himself, under the guise of paying his landscaping business. It was a simple, efficient move. Later that evening, Anthony arrived at the Davis household. Adam Davis greeted him at the door with a knowing expression. "What a disaster this turned out to be," Anthony began. "Disaster doesn't even cover it," Adam replied, leading him to the patio overlooking the golf course. "Bourbon?" The men sat with their drinks in hand, the weight of the situation hanging heavy. Finally, Anthony broke the silence. "How's Zachary holding up?" he asked. Adam raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? Do you even need to ask? He's losing his youngest son, Anthony, and you're losing your grandson. You don't just bounce back from this." Anthony's shoulders sagged under the guilt. "I can't face Eleanor or her mother. Penelope knew Kevin might not be Zachary's, and she stayed silent. Now I don't even know if Eleanor is mine." Adam's expression darkened. "Babe's furious. I've never seen her this upset. If Eleanor weren't Benjamin's mother, I think she'd have done something drastic." Anthony nodded grimly. "Keep her calm. We don't need more drama." Their conversation was interrupted by Babe herself, storming into the room with a cold glare fixed on Anthony. "Why is he here?" she demanded, her voice icy. "And why are there police outside?" Adam raised a hand in an attempt to pacify her. "Take it easy, honey. Anthony's on Zachary's side." Before Adam could explain further, the doorbell rang. Two police officers stood on the porch, their expressions unreadable. Anthony met their gaze, his face calm but resigned. "I expected this," he said quietly, turning to offer his wrists for handcuffs. As the officers led him away, Adam assured him, "I'll call Zachary. We'll sort this out." 6 months later, the chaos had largely subsided. Eleanor had fiercely contested the divorce, initially proposing counseling before shifting to unreasonable demands. DNA results ultimately confirmed that Eleanor was, in fact, Anthony's biological daughter. The revelation brought him a strange mix of relief and disappointment. While his love for her remained, any respect he once had was irreparably lost. Contact between Anthony and Eleanor dwindled to almost nothing, and he doubted it would ever return to what it once was. She denied him any opportunity to meet his grandson, Kevin. A photograph of Anthony, taken at a pharmacy and clearly displaying scratches and fingernail marks on his face, served as key evidence to clear him of a Class C misdemeanor charge for allegedly assaulting his wife. At the same time, Anthony was entangled in divorce proceedings with Penelope, a woman he neither trusted nor respected. Penelope was vehemently opposed to the divorce, and her legal team continually delayed the process. It seemed the stalemate could have dragged on indefinitely if not for a violent incident involving Penelope and Eleanor in a nightclub parking lot. The two women were unable to identify their attacker. However, surveillance footage revealed a small figure, dressed entirely in black and wearing a ski mask, launching a brutal assault. Armed with what appeared to be a slender, weighted rod, the assailant struck the women repeatedly. The video showed the steel bar bending under the force of the blows. Despite sustaining severe injuries, including broken bones and several lost teeth, both women survived without lasting physical damage. From their hospital beds, they confessed they had no idea who might have targeted them, though they speculated that Eleanor's husband, Zachary Davis, could have had a motive. However, Zachary's towering 6'3" height ruled him out as the perpetrator, leaving investigators without any credible leads. The attack profoundly altered Penelope and Eleanor's lives. Their social outings ceased entirely, replaced by a life of anxious confinement at home, where they often quarreled. Over time, they gave up contesting the divorce. Custody arrangements for Benjamin were finalized with a shared 50-50 split, naming Zachary as the primary custodial parent. Neither Penelope nor Zachary received child or spousal support as part of the agreement. New revelations emerged during the court proceedings. DNA tests, ordered by the court, proved that Andrew Hebert was Kevin's biological father, leading to Zachary's name being removed from Kevin's birth certificate. As a result, Andrew was mandated to pay child support to Eleanor. The consequences for Andrew were severe. His wife filed for divorce, leaving him financially responsible for their 3 children, as well as obligated to pay spousal support. Since Andrew had insisted his wife remain a homemaker since the birth of their first child, the financial strain plunged him into poverty, a condition he was unlikely to overcome. Meanwhile, Zachary found stability through the unwavering support of his parents. Despite the turmoil caused by his wife's infidelity, he retained his position at Anthony's landscaping business, where he continued to invest in its growth. Benjamin thrived in this environment, though his visits to his mother's home became a source of emotional difficulty. During these visits, his mother alternated between expressing anger toward Zachary and tearfully lamenting her separation from him. At the same time, his grandmother's animosity toward Anthony remained undiminished. Penelope's bitterness deepened as Anthony's charm and popularity among the single women at their country club became evident. Despite the upheaval, Anthony's parents, Adam and Babe, stood firmly by their son and grandson. Babe, undeterred by the challenges in her family, remained a formidable presence. Even with missing clubs from her set, she secured her fifth consecutive victory in the Women's Golf Championship, reinforcing her indomitable spirit. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Caroline had always prided herself on being in control of her destiny. She had shaped her life with precision, building what seemed to be a flawless reality alongside Marshall, her devoted husband. His steady loyalty often left her astonished, and their long-standing marriage appeared to rest on a love that had no boundaries. Yet, beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect life, a persistent unease had begun to stir, a quiet but insistent discontent she couldn't ignore. She spent years trying to silence it, reassuring herself that the life she shared with Marshall was everything she could ever need. One evening, as they sat across the table from each other, Caroline watched Marshall move through their familiar routines with effortless comfort. It struck her then that there was something unresolved within her, a part of herself she had never dared to confront. The thought had first been planted by her friend Evelyn, whose words now echoed in her mind. "It's liberating," Evelyn had said with conviction. "You'll discover a new version of yourself, and Marshall will still love you through it. Trust me." At first, Caroline dismissed the idea entirely, her doubts overpowering any curiosity. But Evelyn's stories lingered. Each account of personal freedom and fulfillment nudged Caroline closer to a realization she hadn't wanted to face. Over time, the idea began to take root, growing into the possibility that this might be the answer she had been searching for all along. By the time she decided to act, she felt as though her course was already set. "Are you certain about this?" Evelyn had asked her earlier that day, her voice tempered with caution. "Marshall isn't exactly the most adaptable person." Caroline's reply had been firm, even though the tightness in her chest betrayed her nerves. "He loves me," she said resolutely. "He'll understand. This is just something temporary." Evelyn had offered an encouraging smile, her voice steady. "He will. Just hold your ground. He might struggle at first, but he'll come around. This is about you finding yourself." Those words stayed with Caroline as she prepared for the night ahead. Despite her determination, doubt still lingered, an ever-present whisper in the back of her mind. But her decision was made. There was no turning back now. That evening, as she and Marshall sat down to dinner, she struggled to keep her emotions in check. Marshall, as usual, was attentive and charming, blissfully unaware of the impending storm that would soon shake the foundation of their carefully built life. Their conversation drifted through mundane topics, work, future plans, as though everything was perfectly normal. "Marshall, I love you," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but deliberate as she reached for his hand. "I love you too," he responded without hesitation, leaning over to kiss her cheek. Caroline hesitated for a moment, doubt threatening to overwhelm her resolve. Could she truly go through with this? But Evelyn's encouragement echoed in her mind, solidifying her determination. This was the moment. After dinner, Caroline insisted that Marshall relax in the living room while she cleared the table. The brief solitude allowed her to gather herself for the conversation ahead. Once the dishes were done, she poured herself a glass of wine, her trembling hands betraying her inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the living room, where Marshall sat flipping through a magazine, completely oblivious to the weight of what was about to unfold. "Marshall, we need to talk," she began, her voice steady but firm. Marshall looked up, a curious expression on his face. "What's on your mind?" he asked. Caroline inhaled deeply, choosing her words with care. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. We've talked about starting a family, but there's something I need to do first. Marshall's brow furrowed slightly. What is it? He asked, his voice cautious yet patient. She felt her heart racing but pressed on. I need to explore a part of myself that I've neglected for too long, she admitted. I'm going to see other people for a while, just temporarily. This is something I need to do for me. Marshall's expression froze, unreadable. A heavy silence filled the room, the weight of her words settling between them. Caroline braced herself for his reaction, expecting anger or disbelief, perhaps even heartbreak. But when Marshall finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured. Are you serious? He asked quietly. Caroline nodded, her resolve unwavering. I am. I'll always love you, Marshall, but I can't move forward without doing this first. Marshall leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together as he absorbed her words. And you expect me to be okay with this? He asked. It's only temporary, Caroline replied, her voice steady. Once it's out of my system, we can move on. I just need you to trust me. Marshall exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. I'm not happy about this, he admitted, but I won't stand in your way. If this is what you truly need, I'll give you space. Relief washed over Caroline, tempered by a flicker of guilt. She had anticipated resistance, anger, or pleading, but his calm acceptance left her feeling uneasy. Marshall's name echoed through the stillness of the house, Caroline's voice reverberating off the barren walls. She paused, straining to hear a response, but the silence that followed was absolute, almost suffocating. Moving methodically, she searched the living room, peeked into the kitchen, and even checked the unused spare bedroom. There was no trace of him anywhere. Her unease deepened as she approached the front door and found it ajar, swaying slightly, its lock unengaged. Stepping outside, Caroline's eyes darted across the street, scanning for any sign of him. The sidewalk was empty, and the driveway was vacant. His truck was gone. A gnawing sense of dread took hold, wrapping itself around her chest. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her, and she fumbled to pull it from her pocket. Hope flared briefly, but it was extinguished when she saw the message. The sender was an unfamiliar number, and the text read chillingly, "Enjoying your newfound freedom?" A cold shiver crept up her spine. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Marshall's number, her breath catching in her throat. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again, only to be met with the same result. Her thoughts raced uncontrollably. Had he left for good? Was he angry enough to walk away without a word? She recalled Evelyn's reassurances, her friend's confident claims that Marshall's temper would cool. But this felt different. It felt final. In the days that followed, Caroline's desperation mounted. She called relentlessly, left voicemail after voicemail, and flooded his phone with text messages. She even reached out to his friends, hoping someone might know where he was. But her efforts yielded nothing. Marshall had vanished as though he had never existed, leaving her to stew in a toxic mix of confusion and dread. Each unanswered call was a fresh wound, each passing day an unrelenting torment. Her worry gave way to anger. How could he do this? How could he disappear without so much as a word? By Friday, Caroline was a hollow shell of herself, drained from the emotional turmoil. She dragged herself to work, her thoughts consumed by Marshall's absence. But that morning delivered a blow she hadn't anticipated. Sitting on her desk was an envelope bearing her name, written in Marshall's unmistakable handwriting. Her heart raced as she tore it open, dreading what lay inside. What she found made her stomach drop: a divorce petition. The document was brutal in its precision. Marshall's accusations were spelled out clearly: infidelity, irreconcilable differences. Attached to the petition was an itemized list of evidence: photos, videos, and recordings. Each one meticulously documented her betrayals. The clandestine meetings, the hotel liaisons, the hushed conversations. It was all there, laid bare in painful detail. As she flipped through the pages, her hands shaking, she realized the extent of his knowledge. He had known everything. The thoroughness of his preparation was staggering. While she had believed she was in control, Marshall had been quietly gathering evidence, setting the stage for this exact moment. But the most devastating part was yet to come. Toward the end of the document, Marshall's demands were laid out in stark terms. He wasn't just seeking a divorce. He wanted full custody of any future children, a significant alimony payment, and for her to cover all legal expenses. And then there was the final, crushing clause. Caroline was to vacate their home. Everything they had shared, their house, their possessions, their assets, was to be transferred to Marshall. She had until the end of the month to leave, with no exceptions. It was a complete dismantling of her life. Everything she had thought was secure had been stripped away in one calculated move. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She had underestimated Marshall in every possible way. The days that followed were a chaotic blur. Caroline made frantic phone calls, desperately trying to salvage the situation. But Marshall's silence was unyielding. He ignored every message, every voicemail, every plea. It became excruciatingly clear that he had made up his mind and had no intention of looking back. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, her workplace became the epicenter of another disaster. A phone call from HR revealed that the company had been served with a lawsuit. The allegations were severe: unethical behavior and violations of company policy. Caroline's name was prominently featured in the complaint, alongside those of her colleagues and lovers. Calder, Josh, and even Evelyn were implicated. An internal investigation had begun, and her professional reputation was in tatters. The career she had once been so proud of was now on the verge of collapse. Marshall's retribution was total. He had dismantled every facet of her life, leaving nothing untouched. Her carefully constructed world had been reduced to rubble, and there was no escape from the consequences of her actions. She had been so certain of her ability to manipulate him, so confident in her control over their relationship. But Marshall had been steps ahead all along, orchestrating her downfall with chilling precision. In the end, Caroline was left to face the wreckage alone. Her apologies and pleas for forgiveness went unanswered. Marshall had moved on, his vengeance complete. And Caroline, once so self-assured, was left to confront the ruins of the life she had so recklessly destroyed. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.